Warhammer 40k is for cucks and fat.
I come back from passing my classes, and this is the shit I'm dealing with. Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. I apologize for the long absence, but after finally getting through my third term of classes and passing all of them, which thankfully is the case, I'm glad to finally come back and doing more content for you guys. This time it's going to be a little different, mostly because of the fact that I lost a bet. So, for context, I did a Salt Bingo stream with none other than IAM_Desire, or I hope I said that right. I probably said that wrong. I'm sorry, Desire. But eventually, we went through the entire thing, and I ended up losing. Really close game, by the way. Shout out to him. So now, as a result of this, I have to react to everybody's favorite Nintendo fanboy and everybody's favorite stroke face user, Harmon Smith. And this guy I've been following for quite a bit. I never really do Salt content because other creators that are bigger than me are capable of doing that, and I'm just not that kind of person. But this guy has always just been on my radar because he's a very special case. And one of the reasons why I say so is with the topic of these videos that we're going to be reacting to, which is my current obsession, eldenringnightreign. For context, I had about 60 hours almost into the game and almost damn near a platinum on Steam, so I figured it was only fair that I jump right into the fray with all this myself because, well, I have no choice. And this time around, I'm gonna try and tackle this as fairly as possible because I do want to tackle this in a robust substantive discussion type of way. So, without further delay, let's go ahead and jump right back into the fray. Alright, so the two videos that we're going to be focusing on today is going to be mainly about Elden Ring Nightreign, and they follow as Elden Ring Nightreign is the beginning of the end of From Software, and FromSoft fanboys are refusing to admit that Elden Ring Nightreign has failed, which obviously is not true given the fact that this game sold, what, 3 million units, and then like 2 million copies in the first day, and has a 313,000 player count on Steam all time. So, I mean, if the only thing that's really failed is your brain cells, but that's up to you anyway. So, anyways, let's do this.
So you pay off Jeff Keighley for a Game of the Year award, you pretend that your game sold 30 million units, you gaslight people into believing that Elden Ring is one of the biggest releases of the generation, and what do? You immediately turn around and turn it into Fortnite.
Okay, over 20 seconds in, and we're already off to a flyer. So, this is what he always does. He crams in like a crap ton of things that are obviously objectively false, but he just spouts it out anyway, and it just becomes a complete whiplash for most viewers. So, let's break this down one by one. Okay, first off was when he mentioned Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards. It's kind of funny that he always does, considering how he talks about he's never going to watch the Game Awards ever again after 2023, and that he mentions about how the Jeff Keighley is a shill show, blah, 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 blah. And the only reason why he's mentioning it now is because Elden Ring Nightreign has a lower Metacritic score, which is honestly still 70s and 80s, which is still good anyway, but it's always funny to me that he always finds a way to throw the Game Awards in somehow, despite pretending not to care. We all know you truly care about this, Harmon. It's not even rocket science at that point. Okay, and then the next thing he mentions is about how the game is pretending to have sold 30 million units. No, the game legitimately sold 30 million units. And a large majority of that is because 12 million units was sold within like the first 5 weeks of the game launching, and for it to still sell that many units over time is incredibly impressive, considering that this game has pretty much had only a 2-year life cycle, considering Shadow of the Erdtree came out in 2024, which, by the way, that sold about over 5 million units and probably is still going regardless. So I don't get his logic here. I don't get what he means when he's trying to quote-unquote pretend that they sold 30 million units, even though we know for a fact that it did. So I'm not exactly quite sure what his logic is here. And then there's also the concept about how I love this. I love this comparison a lot. He tries to claim that they turned Elden Ring into Fortnite, when literally the only comparisons that you could have with Elden Ring and Fortnite is the circle and the storm damaging you as you're outside of the circle. That's it. That's the only comparison that you could make between Elden Ring Night Reign and Fortnite, when a large majority of the rest of the game is based off of roguelike mechanics. Does it do the best when it comes to roguelike mechanics? Not really, as there are better roguelikes out there, but honestly, it's a good step forward for really spicing up the FromSoft formula. It's extremely easy to mesh Souls-like and roguelike mechanics together, and it actually would be really good, you know? And it's clear that with Elden Ring Night Reign being as successful as it is and as good as it is right now, I guarantee Duskbloods is probably going to follow the same format, even with PvP at the same time, so that's going to be interesting. So I'm not sure what he's trying to say here with this first 20 seconds in. We're off to a great start.
You know, this must have always been the long-term plan, because I can't imagine that Miyazaki actually really thought that Elden Ring would have succeeded long-term. Because I pointed this out when the game first came out, is that, like, this is just Dark Souls again, it's just open world, it's going to wear off eventually. You know, what's the long-term plan for this brand? Okay, what are they going to do with it?
Well, Miyazaki himself has said that basically what he wants is that maybe smaller developers be able to take the lead of FromSoft in the future. In a quote from the RockPaperShotgun.com article saying that Elden Ring is the limit for From Software project scale, he mentions about how that he'd love to see up-and-coming developers within From Software take the lead, saying that perhaps having multiple projects is the next stage, where some of the younger talent can have the opportunity to manage and direct game design for a smaller project. And Night Reign is the start of those quote-unquote smaller projects. And honestly, with this current director, Ishizaki, he cooked with this game. Yeah, it's mostly a roguelike, open-world, Souls-like formula game, but for his first game directing, he did a really good job. And I can only see this kind of mentality and other stuff going forward. We also saw this with Armored Core 6. And I love also in the article, he also does mention that he does think that Elden Ring was the limit in terms of project scale, which I do think is a good thing, because it does allow Miyazaki and other developers in From Software to be able to tackle smaller scale projects, and Elden Ring is Night Reign is no exception to this. So, and let's be honest, Miyazaki is not going to be able to do Souls-like games in From Software going for a very long time. He's not going to be like Kojima, where he'll make games till he dies and then maybe make even more after death, but it's still very refreshing that Miyazaki is wanting newer talent to be able to take lead in terms of game development, and Night Reign was no exception here. It's not that he wanted to quote-unquote turn the game into Fortnite, it's just that he wanted to expand the company's horizons, you know? And I think that's a good thing. That's something that should be encouraged, not shat on, you know what I mean?
And they literally just turned it into Fortnite. They literally were just like, well, we gotta do what Fortnite does. And yeah, FromSoft, the company that is only famous for being so dead set against like industry trends and like just the general gameplay design, they made their game into Fortnite.
Again, I'm not sure where the Fortnite comparisons are. There's only one thing that's similar to Fortnite, and then the rest is taken from either Souls-like or roguelike mechanics. I really don't get what he's trying to do here. Also, did you notice that cutaway during the part of his video? You know what that is, Harmon? That's called cutting your pauses. When you're pausing in certain videos, you cut out those pauses and be able to actually make your video sound good, you know? That's how editing is supposed to work. I just gave you a basic tutorial for that, so I hope you take that into account.
And right now, it's kind of like a repeat of what happened with Shadow of the Erdtree, where shit stayed on the Erdtree, excuse me.
I always love when he tries to make stupid nicknames for specific games. First it was Baldur's Gate 3, and then Elden Dingling, and then now it's Shitstain of the Erdtree. And then when he actually goes to try to use it, he doesn't even really take the opportunity to do so. Instead, he corrects himself afterwards. I find that hilarious.
It's kind of the same situation, what we're seeing right now, where FromSoft fanboys are just guzzling down like Night Reign, not willing to acknowledge the game's very obvious problems and the flaws.
That's actually not entirely true, because a large majority of the talks that I've seen of eldenringnightreign is that acknowledging that while it is a good game, there is a lot of big problems with it. And even myself, I have my own criticisms. Me, Klutzy, and Blast, when we all played together, we did have criticisms with the game. For example, no duos mode, crossplay is still not implemented, no voice chat or voice comms or anything like that, which honestly, to me, it's not really that big of a deal, considering voice comms isn't really something that Elden Ring does. Now, at the same time, I do think that they should implement crossplay, and at the same time, they really should fix... If there's one criticism I can give, is fix the ping system. The ping system, while it's okay, it should be far more effective. Like, say, if you wanted to ping a certain weapon, which you can be able to do, it's just, I wish it was a lot more... not streamlined, but more refined, I guess. I wish it was just better implemented. So, and a large majority of the conversations that I've had of Elden Ring Nightreign are talking about the game's problems, but at the same time, a lot of us acknowledge that with the right amount of feedback, and if they play their cards right, this game might have the biggest long-term development and continuation of any of the other games, you know? And I see a lot of potential with Nightreign going forward. So I don't know if it's just me or anything like that, but yeah, I'm interested to see where Nightreign goes from here.
Right. You know, people are a bit more willing to accept that, like, yeah, this isn't the genre I wanted. Nobody cares about the multiplayer with Elden Ring. That was actually, like, a really good sign that, like, Elden Ring was kind of underwhelming, by the way, is the fact that, like, nobody cares about the multiplayer in this. But
I love how he had to try to find the smallest amount of criticism and say that it's a good sign that Elden Ring was actually a bad game, because they mentioned about how nobody really cared about the multiplayer. I don't know why that's just so funny to me. I just think it's funny how he's trying to find the smallest amount of crumbs just to prove that the game is bad. It's just funny to me.
You know, nobody likes the multiplayer in Souls games, okay? It's just a thing for tryhards to, like, get one up over noobs, but it doesn't really add anything to the game. It detracts from the core experience. Nobody likes it. And FromSlop, in their infinite wisdom, was just like, oh, we're going to make an entire IP based on the concept.
I wouldn't say that nobody likes it, because there's a lot of PvP players out there, but in this case, the game is clearly designed for multiplayer, and a large majority of people seem to like that aspect, especially in previous Souls games where people love to do co-op boss fights, or how they like PvP and stuff like that, so I wouldn't say that's 100% true.
Like, let's make a multiplayer Souls game. You know, never mind that, like, the movesets of these bosses are so limited that, like, you know, having someone else with you completely breaks the game.
For some bosses, like, say, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, yeah, but a large majority of the bosses scale with the amount of players that are on the team. So if you have 3 players, the bosses are going to have a lot more health. And, again, a large majority of the Night Lords that we fight are specifically designed for co-op. So I'm not sure exactly what he's saying here.
You know, never mind that, like, the Elden Ring lore isn't fleshed out enough or interesting enough to make a multiplayer game interesting, and so they had to bring in, like, characters from Dark Souls to get anybody remotely interested in what was happening.
That's why it's not canon. That's why they're trying to preserve the lore, because the game isn't canon. I'm not sure what he's getting at here. Also, it's a complete lie that Elden Ring's lore isn't all that interesting to make a multiplayer game out of it. I mean, Smoketown's videos give an indication of that.
You know, never mind that, like, if the world of Elden Ring was Fortnite, like, why didn't we just Fortnite it to begin with?
If the world wasn't Fortnite, why wouldn't they just Fortnite it to begin with? What? My brain broke hearing that. Also, the concept of, oh, they have to use Dark Souls bosses to get anybody any remotely interested. A large majority of those bosses, well, I'd say like 1 or 2, actually got genuine facelifts. It's actually amazing. Spelter Demon got a massive upgrade in comparison to Dark Souls 2. So I'm not, again, I don't get it. I'm not sure what he's trying to say here.
It's just like, what? this is what they came up with. You know, this is what they produced. And what's more, they made it pretty clear with Duskbloods, you know, the announcement of their next big project, you know, exclusively on the Nintendo Switch platform, the superior gaming platform, the market leader.
Ah, there it is. There it is. That's exactly what we were looking for. Oh, Duskbloods is coming out on the Nintendo Switch 2, the superior platform, the market leader platform. Oh my gosh, I knew he was gonna say something like this. And watch as he then glazes or shits on Duskbloods even further for it being a Nintendo Switch exclusive. I think it's kind of hilarious how it took just one game being exclusive to the Switch 2 for him to be like, oh, the superior platform. Like, brother, come on now.
When they announced their bigger project, their next big step after Elden Ring, they made it very clear that they're going to double down on what they're doing with Night Reign. You know, this multiplayer choose your character slop, you know, something that nobody in the audience asked for, nobody wanted, and is becoming very, very apparent is a massive, massive misstep.
I would not say that it's a massive misstep. I honestly think that it's a good, interesting step towards developing games that are very different from what they used to. I mean, Armored Core 6 is also kind of similar to that. And honestly, with Miyazaki helming that particular project, I feel as though that Duskbloods is just going to be Night Reign, but better. And it's clear that Miyazaki is really excited for this, hence why he made it a Nintendo Switch exclusive. Do I agree that it should be an exclusive? No. I've had conversations about this with my friends multiple times about how I don't think it should be exclusive, but that's besides the point. I don't think it's a particular misstep. A large majority of people probably did not want this. You are right about that, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist. It's not like trying to turn it into Fortnite. Again, we'll see where it goes when it comes to Duskbloods, but that's all we can do right now is speculate. So, we'll see.
You know, FromSoft fans are autistic, you know?
Yes, I am. I'm not sure how this is an actual point.
That's the reality of it. The reason why they're so obsessed with this brand is because they developed, like, this specific fixation on this idea that, like, ducking and rolling was like peak gameplay design, right?
I mean, they must be doing something right if dodging and rolling was a superior game design, considering how Demon Souls to now eldenringnightreign, that the game design is still incredibly inspirational and incredibly well designed, hence why there's so many Souls-likes coming out nowadays. Yeah, I made a joke about how Souls-likes are here to stay on my Twitter account, but at the same time, yeah, it's getting a bit oversaturated. At the same time, though, that just speaks volumes of how influential the Souls-like formula was.
They think Souls is way harder than it actually is, and that they're good gamers because they can breeze through it in like an hour, right?
Well, I mean, to people who were expecting Shadow of the Erdtree to be a massive breeze, yeah, they would probably say that, but I wouldn't say anything else other than that otherwise.
That's the mindset of like the average like Souls like spur, right? FromSoft, like producing games in different genres that require a more diverse skill set that are nothing like the games that like people claim are like peak. This is alienating their core audience, you know?
In some ways, yeah, I can see that. But again, Night Reign does some interesting stuff with, let's say, like the Nightfarers. The Nightfarers were some of the cooler parts of the game because each of them had their own specific weapons and skill sets that is tailored unique to them. The Recluse, in my opinion, is one of my personal favorites in more ways than one, but that's besides the point, because you truly can just customize how you want to be able to play the game and how you can be able to manage spells, create certain concoctions to help you. I mean, the first time that I played Recluse with my buddies, we went through the enhanced Gaping Jaw fight, which, by the way, is another fantastic part of the game in and of itself, that they're doing enhanced versions of bosses to make them harder, which I think is really interesting how they're taking even more some of Monster Hunter routes. So, again, that's not entirely true. I get what you're trying to say. This is what annoys me about Harmon, is that he's trying to make a good argument here and there, but because of how inept he is and how he just doesn't understand this genre, it makes it so that the points that he wants to make doesn't come across. And that's where it gets really annoying.
We are beginning to see the backlash to FromSoft being overhyped among the general community. They are trying to like pull in more normies, getting more casuals, and it's just alienating the people who like genuinely love FromSoft for what it is.
Okay, first of all, again, cut your pauses. Second of all, yeah, in a way, they really didn't have to cater to quote-unquote normies. It's because Elden Ring itself was able to branch an entirely new audience without sacrificing the core gameplay itself. That's why Elden Ring was so popular, and that's why Elden Ring was so influential amongst the gaming community when it came out, is because they were able to pull this massive group of people without having to sacrifice so much of what they are. So, again, you're wrong. It's just blatantly you're wrong, but again, go ahead, go off, Queen.
You know, what FromSoft should have done was make entirely new IPs and franchises that appealed to different people, but the audience would have rejected that too, you know?
Not entirely true, because Bloodborne exists, and Sekiro exists, and Armored Core 6 exists, and eldenringnightreign exists to some extent, even though it does borrow a little bit from Souls formulas, and Duskbloods exists. So again, that's just not really the case here. Again, another point that he's trying to make just doesn't come across. So
it was always like going to be like a very long, like hard road, like getting out from under Elden Ring's, getting out from the success of these games.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Because like FromSoft just isn't going to be allowed by their audience to produce anything different.
Again, not true. See previous statement before this.
You know, their audience is so fixated on like the idea of what Elden Ring and FromSoft is that like they're going to get very visibly upset with any kind of deviation from that at all, you know.
Sekiro, Armored Core 6, hello. Think, McFly, think.
Like previously, the most controversial FromSoft game I would say was Sekiro. Actually, a lot of core fans would tell you that like it was just punch out, it was just pattern recognition, and you know, they don't have the self-awareness to understand that that's true for like Souls as well. But
comparing Sekiro to Punch-Out is quite the comparison. Definitely the comparison of all time. Also, good to know that you finally remembered Sekiro.
Sekiro is like a really good example of like what would happen if FromSoft made their games more action focused and less like RPG focused. You know, like instead of being about the build, it's about like actually playing the game.
Yeah, and Sekiro would go on to sell 10 million units worldwide by September 2023. So, I mean, it clearly is a demand there, and people have gone on record to say that Sekiro was genuinely one of, if not the best, FromSoft game that they've ever created. So,
you know, FromSoft cannot make action games. They are very slow compared to their competition. The animations are garbage. Like Sekiro is just like clearly outstripped from like games like Bayonetta, which were over a decade old at that point.
Okay, now I'm starting to think he's got the action game term confused, because comparing Sekiro to Bayonetta, even though they're two completely different set of action games, I'm confused here.
You know, like Sekiro being more action focused demonstrated FromSoft's like unique weaknesses in this regard.
Again, that's not entirely true, because again, 10 million units worldwide for Sekiro and 3 million units for Armored Core 6, which is the highest of any other Armored Core 6 game. So, yeah.
You know, the thing that made them so popular and beloved to begin with is going to be like the anchor that keeps dragging them down as they try and get away from it. You know, their fans, you know, the people who are sitting there and telling you that FromSoft is the greatest developer in the industry, they don't want innovation. They don't want change. They don't want games like Elden Ring to be anything other than like open world Dark Souls. You know, the very idea that Elden Ring is like a Fortnite clone is like appalling to them. That it's been casualized, you know?
People were trying to say that it was casualized long before Night Reign even came out. Don't even start with me, even though that's 100% not really the case. Because, again, they were able to create Elden Ring and make it huge for a large majority of modern audiences without having to sacrifice its core identity. Something that a lot of games nowadays should be able to take lessons from, you know?
It's wasting their time and resources when they could be putting out more of the same. But if they put out more of the same, they would be seeing diminishing returns. You know, FromSoft is in a very interesting position where we are seeing the developer that's been put up on a pedestal over the past decade You know, the one that seems to have replaced CD Projekt Red, the one that's like being worshipped online. We are in this position where we're in the early stages of seeing this company fail.
We are nowhere close to that kind of goal, buddy. Trust me. They made enough money off of Elden Ring, and even more so off of Night Reign as is. I think they're going to be just fine. So I doubt they're losing sleep.
You know, after all that hype, all that worship, you know, pretending that like Elden Ring like was better than Zelda, and like acting as if like FromSoft was the best developer in the industry for putting out the same game over and over again. Like, this is the beginning of the end of the company.
This is another thing that he loves to do. He loves to compare literally any game that is a completely different genre to Zelda. I don't know why he does it, because I don't know, brand recognition, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me, considering that both Souls games and Zelda games are completely different genres and different complete games altogether. I mean, Miyazaki was inspired by Zelda games, but that is besides the point. The comparison is still completely illegitimate. And every single time he does this, I can't help but feel like I have to plant my face with my palm so hard that the world implodes around me.
You know, and I couldn't be more happy. I couldn't be happier to see it happen now. You know, it's really fitting, I think, to see like Night Reign get buried by the release of the Nintendo Switch 2.
You're really happy to see another company die so that your Lord and Savior Nintendo could be able to surpass it, even though just based off brand recognition alone, Nintendo will do just fine regardless. And I love how he's also mentioning the Switch 2, because that's all he's been playing lately. But that's besides the point anyway, which is interesting too, because clearly he bought Cyberpunk and Street Fighter 6, which is two games that he has criticized in the past. So that's quite an interesting little tidbit there.
You know, it's gonna be amazing seeing Nintendo fans come out and call Duskblood shit. You know, like, it's gonna be really satisfying, like, being the prominent gaming YouTuber who's always spoken about FromSoft, who's always hated these games, who's always spoken out about them, you know, make a video about how garbage Duskbloods is when it finally releases in 2026.
That's honestly kind of a no-brainer to me, because let's be real, you were never going to be giving this game a fair chance to begin with, just like how you were never going to be giving any From Software game a fair chance in any sense of the regard. I mean, you were able to completely play Elden Ring fine on your own, and you still didn't give it a fair chance. You were never going to be giving any of these companies that weren't Nintendo a fair chance whatsoever. So you going on record to admit that you are going to shit on Duskbloods when it comes out, even though it's coming to your platform exclusively, then that doesn't surprise me, because we all know this is exactly what you were going to do regardless. This is exactly what you were going to do.
You know, like, it is going to happen. You know, that's just the reality of it. You know, I'm not going after these games because they're not on Nintendo consoles or because I'm a casual.
That's a lie. We all know exactly why you're going after them. Is because they're not on your precious platform. I mean, you've gone on record to say that Street Fighter 6 should have been exclusive on the Nintendo Switch, even though you say that it's a stagnant franchise, so I don't know why you would recommend it to be on a Switch exclusive title. I don't know. The things that go on inside his head could really encompass an inbreeding multiverse.
I'm going after them because I have higher standards and understand that there's far better developers out there.
You say you have higher standards, and I'm guessing those standards must be Princess Peach Showtime, right?
The vast majority of FromSloppers don't play games and have no idea what's actually out there.
I mean, that's, again, not 100% true. I myself, even though, yes, I know this is anecdotal evidence, I have been playing tons of games over the years. On PC alone, I've played games like, say, Marvel Rivals, Kill Knight, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Repo, one of my favorite games of this year, Doom games, Bolt Gun, The Balatro, one of my favorite card games of all time, Mullet Magic, Ultra Kill. My Steam list could go on, and even more recently, one of my favorite games of this year, eclipsing eldenringnightreign in every way, shape, and form, is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Video coming out on that soon, I promise. Okay, so that was the first video, and yeah, it was pretty terrible. I mean, I think that's safe to say. It's very interesting how far he's willing to go to shit on this franchise. How far he's willing to go to shit on other franchises similar to it or completely different to it at all. You know, it's very hilarious to me. And yet somehow we're still not done because the stipulations are that I had to do this for about a damn hour. So we're now going to focus on the second video that I have lined up, which is FromSoft fanboys are refusing to admit that eldenringnightreign has failed. Oh no, not the failures. How will we ever survive the failures? As I sit in a giant pile of gold coins, Scrooge McDuck style, because if I'd swim in it, I'd pretty much just, well, die. Anyways, let's just go ahead and get into it. I apologize if you lose any what's left of your brain cells by the end of this. I'm just as frustrated and burned out as you are, but we gotta keep going.
Right now, Elden Ring fans are in this coping and seething period where they simply can't bring themselves to admit that Elden Ring Night Reign is not only a failure, this is probably the beginning of the end of FromSoft's golden age.
No, not necessarily true, obviously, because I mentioned it before. The game sold 2 million units in its first day, has an all-time peak of 300,000 players, and is still keeping a good track record of players a couple of weeks afterwards. It's very interesting how he's consistently trying to say that, oh, this is the beginning of the end of this game, even though he said that as far as back as Armored Core 6, which was 2 years ago. So it's amazing how far he's like, oh, this is the beginning of the end. And then Armored Core 6 comes out. Oh, this is the beginning of the end. And then Shadow of the Erdtree comes out. Oh, this will be the beginning of the end. And then Night Reign comes out. No. This will be the beginning of the end. At some point, you got to be able to know when to let sleeping dogs lie.
Of just putting out nothing but 10 out of 10 banger hits. You know, it's very similar to what happened with Squaresoft back in the 90s, right? Where they put out Final Fantasy VII, which was inferior to 6 in every way, shape, and form. They put out Final Fantasy VII on an inferior video game platform, the PlayStation, and for a long time it was kind of the golden standard as to why PlayStation was superior to Nintendo.
Okay, I can't really say much on Final Fantasy because I'm only just recently now getting into the series, so I'm not really going to comment much on here, but I do find it funny how he has this is another thing, he has this burning, fascinatingly interesting hatred for Sony. And just this fascinating hatred for the PlayStation, because I love how he's like, oh, they created Final Fantasy VII, which was inferior to 6 in every way, shape, and form. It's interesting because I've seen nothing but glowing praise for the original Final Fantasy VII. I think Maximilian Dood spent his entire personality on Final Fantasy VII, including the remakes. But I also find it interesting because SebiWebs on a YouTube short, he did mention about how comparing FF7 to FF6 about how which one would you want to play more. He left a really interesting input on that, so I'm just going to leave that here.
Which is better, Final Fantasy VI or 7? This argument's never going to get settled, but let's attempt it anyway. The answer is, it depends. If you prefer pixel art, the Joker, and a more fantasy-heavy setting, then go FF6. But if you prefer 3D, Griffith, and science fiction, then go Final Fantasy VII. I personally prefer 7 for its plot twists, its crushing atmosphere, and its emotionally hard-hitting moments, but Final Fantasy VI, on the other hand, is foundationally iconic to the series. It is pure FF. At the end of the day, the argument's never going to get settled, alright? So you may as well just troll both sides and say Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
It's very interesting. I recommend his channel. He's great.
Like, oh, Final Fantasy VII, it's the greatest game ever made. And even as the series continued to get worse and decline, you saw people clinging onto the brand, even as late as the release of Final Fantasy 15. It wasn't until Final Fantasy 16 came out, almost 25 years later, that people suddenly began to wake up and realizing that, like, wait a minute, I haven't enjoyed a Final Fantasy game since the Super Nintendo.
I mean, some people do like 8, 9, and 10 and 10 too, as far as I'm aware, so I don't necessarily think it's true. I do think that at some point there was a shift in how Final Fantasy was structured, and that's what led to people turning away from it. I think what turned away for a lot of people was just that the games started to feel more actions and story focused as opposed to turn-based RPG focused. A large majority of the criticisms of, say, 7 Remake, Rebirth, and 16 was that it doubled down on just being Devil May Cry, but with turn-based events. Now, again, I'm not going to comment on this because I haven't really played much of any of the games, so that's just about as far as I'll go here.
You know, when you get to that level of fanaticism and obsession, like, it's very difficult for people to move away from it. You know, people don't see themselves as fans of Final Fantasy VI. They see themselves as fans of the Final Fantasy brand in general. And so they play through the games over and over and over again as they come out, you know, not willing to admit to themselves that the series peaked back in the 90s.
I mean, some games have really not aged well over the years, and some games have gotten better over the years in comparison. I've seen a lot of people talk about how the original Final Fantasy games are still really good to this day, especially 6. So I guess I can see what you're trying to say here, but yeah, that's all I got there.
Okay, back in 94, back when it was still a Nintendo exclusive franchise, and before the dark times.
Again, he mentions about how it was a Nintendo exclusive franchise. Keep that in mind for later.
All right, we've seen this play out before, right? Elden Ring is kind of a similar situation to that.
Again, not necessarily true because, I mean, 30 million sales for the base game, over 5 million sales for the DLC, and 3 million for the most part for Night Reign. So I think From Software is fine.
You know, it's very similar to what we saw with CD Projekt Red, where they were put on this pedestal, people worshiped them as the greatest devs in the gaming industry, and then they immediately blew it with Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, that's kind of true, because Cyberpunk 2077 did release in such a terrible state, so I can understand where he's coming from here. See, like, here's what I'm talking about. He makes good articulate points, you know, where everybody talked about how great CD Projekt Red is. They made Witcher 3 one of the best RPGs out there, and then blew it with Cyberpunk. And yeah, that took a lot of patches to get better, and now I'm guessing, from what I can tell from people like my buddy Ryan and Sir Bravian, Cyberpunk 2077 is in the best state that it's been in a long time, and that took 5 years to do so. So I get what he's trying to say, and I do kind of agree with him here. It's going to be interesting on what The Witcher 4 is going to do going forward.
You know, Cyberpunk 2077 had all these glitches, all these problems. It was completely unplayable on most of its releases, on most of its console releases, and just really terrible on the others. You know, Cyberpunk 2077 had all these issues, and people have spent the past 5 years trying to gaslight you into thinking that, like, the game is good now, they fixed it, at its core it's a great game, when it simply isn't true, you know?
Honestly, again, I can't comment since I really didn't play Cyberpunk 2077 because I wasn't dumb enough to get it at launch. But from what I can tell from close friends of mine, the game is in a far better state. And then they released animes like Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and that kept the interest in Cyberpunk going until Phantom Liberty came along, which completely changed the nature of the game. So again, I'm not sure what he's trying to say when he's saying, oh, they gaslight us into thinking that, oh, the game's good now. Clearly it is, because the game is still doing incredibly well, and it still has a genuinely interesting kind of fan base. Now, did it take 5 years to get this fan base? Absolutely. But that's besides the point. Now it's a lot better now, and people are liking it.
Like, that's a really good example as to, like, how far people will go to protect the big corporate anti-Nintendo, like, entities, you know?
Okay, first of all, again, cut your pauses. Second of all, I love how he always tries to say these anti-Nintendo entities, because everybody has to be against Nintendo. It's all gotta be, oh, this company is clearly making a game because they're spiteful against Nintendo or something like that. Bro, stop pretending like Nintendo's a victim. That kind of behavior is exactly why Nintendo has been able to get away with some of the worst business practices in the last couple of decades. Even more so now.
You know, there are just dozens of examples of this over the years, but, like, Elden Ring is just, I think, probably is very clear to me that Elden Ring is the moment where normies start to get on board the FromSoft train.
Okay, first of all, again, I hate that I have to beat a dead horse, but seriously, the amount of times I have to do your homework for you and cut your pauses is staggering. Second of all, I love how his camera is constantly in and out of focus as I'm trying to watch this video. It's like watching a Zack Snyder movie. It's like watching Army of the Dead. It's really obnoxious. Second of all, I love how he's trying to say that Elden Ring is where we're starting to get an influx of normies, which, yeah, sure, in some cases, yes, but at the same time, again, I've mentioned this ad nauseum, Elden Ring has been able to bring in more people without sacrificing its identity.
You know, they start hyping this game up as the best thing ever, even if they can't beat the first couple of bosses. You know, even if they have to use guides, even if they watch streamers near constantly to get through it, even if they have to have, like, let them solo her, let me solo her, like, beat Melania for them. You know, these people, like, obsess over Elden Ring because, like, oh, it's the greatest game of the decade, you know? Like, Elden Ring was worshipped, you know, to downplay Nintendo products for that year.
What Nintendo products exactly? Are we talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 3? Because in that case, last I checked, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was getting glowing reviews. Also, don't disrespect Let Me Solo Her. That man is a legend. He carried so many people with Melania because of just how overtuned Waterfowl Dance was. So, and again, what is this with whole about shaming people for looking at tips or looking up a guide? This is something that FromSoft fans have been able to encourage for decades now, even going as far as back as, say, Dark Souls 1. So, and Elden Ring especially encourages you to play exactly the way that you want to. Play how you want. Play with all these broken builds. Play with all these powerful spells. Play with all these different weapons and abilities, because that's the kind of gameplay that Elden Ring rewards. So, good lord, is it just so interesting how I'm able to just debunk these points very quickly.
And now, like, the reality of the situation is the game's popularity is on the decline, and people just can't bring themselves to admit it.
We can't bring ourselves to admit it because it's not entirely true at all. In fact, I think the popularity of the franchise is just going to get bigger with stuff like the live-action movie and other things. Gosh, I hope that's really good. I really hope that's good. I really hope they don't screw this up. I really do. Because there's so much potential for that movie that I really hope that they take advantage of everything that they do with it. But I'm not entirely hopeful. But we'll see.
You know, eldenringnightreign is a complete disaster in every sense of the word. It is not going to have a player base. It is not going to remain relevant. It's not going to have some resurgence of popularity. Like, the formula is not going to be suddenly become, like, super popular with Dustbloods, you know, on Nintendo Switch 2.
I love how he mentions, oh, on Nintendo Switch 2, because it's obvious that he's trying to hammer the point home that, oh, it's a Switch exclusive, ha ha ha, rub it in your face. But also, again, we don't know if this is going to be the transition going forward. This is just smaller projects that FromSoft is wanting to do, something that Miyazaki is wanting to do. And this should be encouraged, not completely trashed on. Now, Night Reign, as in terms of its cycle, we don't know exactly how long it's going to have. We don't know exactly how long Night Reign is going to continue to sustain itself. But if they play their cards right, if they continue to add interesting content like they did with the enhanced Everdark Sovereign Gaping Jaw fight, the game's going to have longevity, you know? It's going to be very interesting in how they do it.
You know, more and more people are, like, you know, have to cope and seethe about the supposed success of games like Night Reign, of games like Armored Core 6, of games like Sekiro, of Bloodborne, you know, like anything that isn't a mainline, like a Dark Souls game, just gets completely rejected by the community at large, you know.
Bloodborne being rejected from the main general public, bro, it is easily the most requested 60 FPS update and remaster that Sony, just for whatever reason, refuses to do. Fans have been asking for an update from Bloodborne for years now, as it's stuck on the PlayStation 4. If it got a 60 FPS update on PlayStation 5, and if it got, like, say, a remaster or something like that on PC and PlayStation, a lot of majority of people would be able to stick with that particular game. It's not my favorite of the games, but it's no doubt that that game has a huge lasting impact on players, as it's one of the best games that a lot of people really enjoy. And for whatever reason, Sony just refuses to give that to them. Instead, we get remasters like Days Gone, The Last of Us, and freaking Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West of all games, so that PlayStation fanboys and the 6 other people who say that the games are good can be able to wave the graphics around like it's the second coming of Jesus. It's interesting to me just how far Sony is just refusing to give the updates that Bloodborne wants. And as mentioning Armored Core 6, it's interesting that now you decide to remember that.
The only reason that Elden Ring did as well as it did was because it was essentially Dark Souls 4, after not getting one for several years,
Why would we want a Dark Souls 4? That's illogical. Dark Souls 3 ended the franchise as decisively as it could get. That's why they continue to expand on other franchises. That's why they're making games like Sekiro. That's why they made games like Elden Ring. That's why they made games like Armored Core 6, because they wanted to branch out and they wanted to be able to create something that will last long before or after Dark Souls. That's why for them to make a Dark Souls 4 would completely misrepresent Dark Souls 3's decisive ending and how it was a perfect conclusion for the trilogy. So I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't know what he is.
Sekiro was way different, not as popular.
Not true. 10 million units. Again, just throwing it out there.
Bloodborne was way different, not as popular.
Not as popular? Bro, they've been making fan games like Bloodborne Kart and the Bloodborne PS1 demake before Sony decided to screw those things over. And on top of that, the game, longevity-wise, sold 7 million units. It's clearly popular. It's clear that people want more of it. So, Again, I don't get the point you're trying to make here.
Right, like FromSoft cannot. They are completely incapable of getting outside of their little bubble and appealing to normies, like genuinely appealing to them.
Genuinely appealing to them. What do you mean by that? As opposed to, say, maybe making an easy mode? Is that what you're trying to say? Is that maybe that, like, oh, they're trying to add more accessibility, like adding difficulty options? I mean, that's why freaking Liza P is still being more successful, even though they pandered to genuine casuals. Gosh, I hate how frustrating Liza P is, because I want to go back into it, but the moment they decided to add difficulty options, I just stopped watching. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that they added difficulty options. I just feel like it ruins the integrity of the designs that the game developers of Liza P wanted to make. But that's just me. Again, that's just me. I'm not all for the idea. That was a weird side tangent on Liza P. I should do that more often.
Actually making something that they want to play. All they can do is just latch on to like this fad of hyping them up and start putting out absolute nonsense under like the banner of like, from the makers of Dark Souls. This is a totally an Elden Ring game, guys, and you have to play it because it's Elden Ring.
It is an Elden Ring game in every sense of the word. A large majority of it is taken from Elden Ring, but with new mechanics being added onto it. That's what they wanted to make. That's one of the smaller projects that they wanted to make. So this is kind of a non-point.
A lot of people, I'm sure, went into Night Reign expecting it to be like Elden Ring 2 and came away from it realizing that it was like some shitty like spin-off title, like Final Fantasy Dissidia or something.
That's what the game is. It's a spin-off. It's not a sequel. And they even said that I don't know if they want to make a sequel for the game. They just wanted to make a spin-off. You basically literally just described what Elden Ring is. Nobody expected this game to be a sequel. Also, it's Dissidia, not Dissidia, or whatever bullshit you tried to say. Look, I'm not even that big of a Final Fantasy fan, and even I know what Dissidia is. Come on now.
Like, this is, it's like if they turn, like, Street Fighter into an RPG or something. Like, this isn't anything like any of the actual players, as few as them as they are. This is something that none of the actual players want. Okay, people don't actually enjoy Night Rain. They don't enjoy the gameplay loop. They don't enjoy the structure. You know,
No, I don't know. In fact, I don't agree with you whatsoever. After finally being able to 100% the game on Steam, I can confidently say that I loved Night Rain. I do think that it's an interesting departure from what the games that have come before. I do love that it's pretty much a match made in heaven in terms of roguelike and Souls-like mechanics. Do I wish there was more like variation in terms of its roguelike mechanics? Absolutely. And is it a perfect game? Absolutely not. But no game really is perfect except for Expedition 33, but that's for another time. But it's something that I genuinely enjoyed playing over the last couple of weeks with my pals. Even when during classes I would still take time to play with Klutzy and Blast and Gara and all those other people, because it was genuinely a blast to be playing this kind of game with my buddies, and it was a genuinely fun experience.
people are only hyping it up right now because it's Elden Ring and it's from Slop, and we can't critique it because that would make us look like filthy casuals, you know.
We absolutely can critique these games. That's what people have been doing for years. That's why the conversations about how Dark Souls should have an easy mode has been a conversation for years, because the criticisms surrounding the game are just as ridiculous as the journalism arguments would be able to make. And a large majority of the criticisms, a lot of people have even pointed out for regards to Night Rain. And I've seen even people criticize Elden Ring and Shadow the Erdtree as well. People are able to criticize the games that they love. People are able to criticize. It's not like we're all mindless drones who think that everybody that doesn't like a certain Souls game has some sort of skill issue. Now, the only difference is that whenever we see somebody critique Dark Souls 2, we think that's based because Dark Souls 2 had a lot of problems. The same could also be said for Night Rain, because Night Rain does genuinely have a couple of problems. A lot of it is very noticeable, and it's something that should be addressed over time. Like, again, having no crossplay, no duos, no real genuine fun ping system, and just... It's so weird how he's thinking that, oh, we can't critique these games, as if he doesn't critique Nintendo games in any way, shape, or form. Oh, wait.
We can't align ourselves with Harmon Smith because he's a Nintendo fanboy, you know. We can't think critically about something. We can't critique our product because that would be kneeling to Harmon Smith. That would be acknowledging that Harmon Smith was right all along, and we just can't have that, you know.
And the ego rubbing begins. Oh, we can't critique it because it would mean Harmon Smith was right. Brother, you think you're more important than you actually are. You think you're some sort of celebrity when you're genuinely not. You're just a hack-made book writer who thinks that he's the next J.R. Tolkien, when honestly all you really are is the next Stephanie Meyer. Just being honest here, his books are garbage. And I do think it's funny how he's gone on record to say, oh, that would be kneeling to Harmon Smith. We don't kneel to anyone. The only person I kneel to is the Recluse, because she anyway.
If we don't have Elden Ring, if we don't have this illusion of success, like, we don't have anything. And that's what this all comes down to, is that people are desperate to keep up the illusion that Elden Ring is some highly successful, popular brand. You know, nobody cares about the manga.
That is kind of true. The manga really isn't talked about as much as the mainline series, but I have heard it's pretty good. It's basically just a comedic take on Elden Ring. And I think, honestly, if there's any route that they should have gone, it's that, you know, and that's something I do kind of appreciate. Also, the fact that it even got a manga in the first place is just speaks volumes of how good Elden Ring was.
Nobody cares about the live action movie.
Well, we don't necessarily know if it's going to be a live action, but we do know that a movie is coming. So it's going to be interesting. I think A24 is going to be doing it, and Alex Garland is going to be directing it, which is going to be a very interesting take, given his previous comments. But again, that's besides the point.
Nobody cares about the spin-offs. Nobody cares about the DLC.
Again, 5 million units for Shadow of the Erdtree and about 3 million units within a couple of weeks, and it's probably going to grow even further. Like, stop trying to say something that completely is false in every regard, because you're going to lose every single time. Your arguments do nothing.
Like, Elden Ring is going to be a very quickly declining brand. It is not something that will survive past the initial hype period. And we've been seeing signs of that since even before the DLC came out. But like now that we have like another full release, you know, and seeing like what FromSoft's intentions are going forward with the brand, we can see that like they are moving past their old fan base and trying to capture the Fortnite audience.
That's, again, not entirely true. They're not trying to capture the Fortnite audience. Like I mentioned before, the only real comparisons between this game and Fortnite is the storm and the circle surrounding the areas. That's really it. So I'm not sure what you mean by that. When I think when you're trying to say is that it's trying to capture a more modern audience, which again, Elden Ring has been more than capable of doing anyway. This is why I say that whenever he tries to make a serious point about capturing a specific audience, the way he says it just is so inept and so stupid that what he's trying to say doesn't come across. Intention is more important than execution, and I'm not really going to give claps for wanting to say something and failing at it. Shout out to Jado for that quote.
You know, they are trying to bring in more people, and by appealing to the masses, they are going to lose their most hardcore fans eventually.
Honestly, the only real way that they're going to lose their audience was with the amount of Souls-likes that are coming out right now. Pretty much every single quote-unquote action game is a Souls-like right now. A large majority of them, anyway. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but it's clear, obviously, there are still people that are trying to chase the Souls-like genre, and they're trying to chase that and innovate in certain ways of doing that. So, I don't get his point here, but that's the only real way I see FromSoft failing in anything similar. It won't be because of themselves, but because of the genre, the subgenre that they were able to create, and the oversaturation of it. That's really the only way I can see them failing.
You know, FromSoft games are like unappealing to normies by their nature, right? So trying to like deviate from that eventually is going to steer people away.
Yes, that is true. Previous games were unappealing to normies, and that's potentially a good thing. In a strange way, Elden Ring also kind of helped bring more people to their previous games, because a perfect example is my best friend. After he played Elden Ring all the way through, he went and played previous games. He played Dark Souls 1, he played Dark Souls 3. I don't know if he's played Sekiro yet. I'm probably going to get him to play that, but it's interesting how that level of power that FromSoft has had in the industry over the last couple of decades is able to influence people to want to try out new things. And while there are still people that don't want to because of the difficult nature of them, that's totally understandable. And Elden Ring is the first step that I would recommend anyone doing it, you know?
And Night Reign, to me, is very clearly the beginning of that.
We don't know that for sure. Yeah, obviously there's some cynicism behind this kind of formula. There's some scares for that they're not going to continue to do the traditional stuff that they're really good at while also making these, even though that's exactly what they're trying to do. That's exactly what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to not only create the games that they are known for creating, but they also want to be able to expand on other genres that they want to do. And Night Reign is a good indication of this. Now, whether or not if this is going to continue to stick is out of the question. We don't know this for sure. This just all depends on how Night Reign does and how Duskbloods does. If those don't work, then they'll just go back to their previous Souls formula. There's nothing wrong with that either. And even then, they still also have Armored Core 6 to fall back on. So I don't really think it's fair to start trying to pray or try to question whether or not if it's going to be the beginning of the end for this, which again you have said on multiple occasions.
This is going to be a really exciting, amazing thing to see Elden Ring continue to decline and fail, and I will be here pointing and laughing at it until this IP fades into irrelevancy, just like all of yesteryear's Game of the Year contenders.
And of course, he ends this video with trying to celebrate that eventually these franchise quote-unquote will die, and he will point and laugh. And I don't get his obsession with wanting to see other franchises like this fail. And I think a large majority of this obviously is because he just wants a complete monopoly for Nintendo. And obviously that is what he's wanting. And I just don't agree with that, you know? Gaming is at its best when you have so many different genres and so many different tastes and so many different developers making these games. That's why Nintendo is successful. That's why Xbox was successful for a time before they started shifting more towards just being a third-party developer, even though we all know that it was going to be that way. And that's why PlayStation was popular for a while, even though they've gone full on to the point of just where everything just feels homogenized and everything just feels like the same game. And that's unfortunate to see too. I honestly do hope that each of these companies bounce back. And that's what we should be hoping for. We should be hoping for these developers. We should be hoping for these modern gaming tendencies to bounce back. We should be hoping for better things for this industry, not just trashing on other genres because they're not this particular brand that I like. I don't get this mentality. This is why I don't cover Salt content normally like this, because it's just not something for me. And it's clear through reacting to all this, you can see that I started to get a little frustrated because I don't get this mentality. I really don't. And it's really sad that there are people out there that would continue to limit themselves the way that they do. Anyways, that's pretty much the end of the video. He kind of just ends it with that kind of backhanded statement, and it's interesting to see how he's willing to die on this hill, that he's okay with franchises like this dying, for companies like Projekt Red dying, companies like other franchises like that dying because they're not Nintendo. And it's depressing, really. I've been following this guy for a long time, and that seems to be just his defining personality. And it's a shame, you know, because I do think that if he started really focusing on editing, if he really started focusing on just being a good content creator and stop making really bad books and really creepy books, I might add. It's very weird, the topics that he likes to discuss in those. I do think that he would have some genuine input in the industry if he just got the Nintendo dick out of his ass. It's so sad. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had really for this video. I'm not sure exactly where I wanted to end here, but honestly, all I can say is never be a fanboy. Never be this kind of person that just preys on a company's downfall. I don't agree with that idea. I really don't agree with this concept of how that these companies should deserve to fail because they do this and this and that. Even companies like Nintendo, as shitty as they are, I do hope that anything could turn for the better with any big gaming company, unless if you're Ubisoft. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching and suffering through this with me. I'm very glad to be back into making content, and I'm really excited for what I'm going to be making in the future. I hope to do more uploads. I can't really promise that because school and work has just been pretty much taking over my life. But as of right now, I have a week off, so I can be just a week off of school or anything like that, and so I can focus more into making that kind of content for you guys. So thank you guys very much for watching, and remember to just be good people, you know? So thank you guys so much. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of my content, and I shall see you all in the next video. Oh, interesting. I guess he did some videos on Expedition 33. Let's have a look at those.
We all know that Expedition 33 isn't relevant. It won't be remembered. Nobody cares about it. It's just a stereotypical example of some random flavor of the month game that's basically just picked out of a hat to promote and try and distract people from the games that people are actually playing on Nintendo Hard.
Yeah, no, okay, I'm done. Anyways, toodles.